Hey, Joel Snipes here, and I want to show you a quick example of how you can load HCP data to Reltio using the Reltio Integration Hub. So let's jump into it. I'm going to pick up from the dashboard of a Reltio development tenant. You're going to move to the top right and look for the chocolate bar. After clicking the chocolate bar, you can select the Reltio Integration Hub. From here, you can hit select tenant and choose the tenant you want to be working against. I'm going to be working against a development tenant. And this will drop us into the project section. Now, the first step once you have arrived at the project section is to create a connection. So in our example, we're going to be loading from Amazon S3 to the HCP entity of a Reltio Life Sciences tenant. So click on connections. I already have my S3 tenant or my development tenant in my S3 configured here, but let me show you how you would do that. So start by selecting create connection, search for Reltio. Select the regular Reltio here, not the DT or the SDK. So you want to name your account, maybe something along the lines of Reltio Dev. This is just for you, just a label so you know what it is later. Choose a location or project folder. I'm going to put it in my connections folder. I like to keep all my connections in one spot. For environment URL, this is going to be something along the lines of dev, test, 361. Just depends on what your specific value is for your environment, but in our example, it's dev. You'll put your tenant ID here. So an example, what that'll look like is something like this. The tenant I'm working against, this is the ID. And client authorization, depending on if you're using SSO or just a regular username and password, you would select your option here and put either your keys or username in. So this is already configured for me, so I'm not going to create this. But let me back out. And the next step will be to create a S3 connection. So I'll click create connection again. Search for S3. Maybe I'll name it Reltio S3 staging area or something like this. Again, just a label for your own organization. I'm going to put it in my connections folder. Put your keys. If you want to restrict access to just a single bucket, you can do that here. And the region. And the next step would be to connect. I already have my connection, so I'm not going to do that. But if you filled everything out correctly, you'll now have an active connection to both Amazon S3 and Reltio. Now it's time to create our recipe. So to create a recipe, you go to the recipes tab and click create recipe, give it a name, and choose a location. I'm going to put it in the HCP folder since I plan on loading HCPs, and choose how you would like to trigger this. So for this example, we're going to be loading from S3 whenever a file is dropped in a particular folder. But you also have the option to schedule it, trigger it from a REST API, trigger it from another recipe, all sorts of things like this. You can even build a Slack command as an option. So if you hit start building, you'll be brought to a blank recipe that you can start working against. I'm going to show you a working recipe that we already have. It's called S3 landing to Reltio HCP. So the first thing you're going to do is create a S3 trigger. So this will be a blank tab for you. You click it and you'll click the S3 app. Let's see if I can find an example of what that would kind of look like if you were working from scratch. Action and app, and then you would select S3. So you'll do that for this first one here, and each time you need to create a new piece. So you'll create the S3. I like to store the region of my bucket in a properties here because it tends to be consistent. And if I ever want to update all of my recipes at once, you only have to update it in one place. Fortunately, you can't do that with the bucket, but you can select it from a drop-down list. So what you're going to do is choose your bucket, your region, your comma separator. So comma is common for CSV. If we're doing a CSV listener here, the folder path that you expect your file to be dropped in. So it's going to be pulling this folder every 5 minutes to see if there's been a file dropped. Do we want to look for things other than CSVs? No. And a kind of annoying feature is you're going to have to list all the columns that's going to be available in your data. The best way I've found to do this is just to take the file and copy all the column headers and paste them in here. You can choose your batch size. I just leave this to the default most of the time and skip the header line. So I have headers in my file, but if you don't, you can skip this. Otherwise, you'll lose your first record in your file. Now, a trick I like to do here is to go ahead and test. And the reason why is in this next step, you're going to be doing a mapping exercise to the columns you listed. And if you don't test it, you're going to be manually entering those in. Right, so the same list here of column names, you're going to paste here. And this is just transforming or parsing your CSV. So here we're going to map everything from the S3 to our S3 parser so that this is a chance to rename your columns if you want to, but I did not. And if you look, these are just the same names mapped to one another. It looks incredibly tedious because it is. And you don't have to actually go in here and put a one-to-one mapping for all of these different columns. What you can do is after you paste your column names here, you can hit group map data, go to CSV data lines on the left side for the CSV parser, and then S3 go to rows, columns, and then hit next. And it's going to go ahead and cleverly map these one-to-one for you so you don't have to. Next, just hit apply 90 mappings or however many mappings you had, and you will have your data mapped from S3 to CSV in probably under 5 minutes there. All right, so now we're going to create a repeat action. So you'll click plus and add a repeat action. Mine's already here. And we're going to take the rows from the previous data pill. So from this step up here, we're going to take the rows object and drop it here. We're going to do this in batches, not one by one, and we're going to go with the default of 100 per batch. So what this is going to do is just parse through our CSV and run this action for 100 CSV rows at a time. I'm going to go ahead and add a error handling here option. It's just going to monitor for issues. If there are no issues, it's going to go on to creating our HCPs. So you're going to add a action in app, Reltio, and you're going to do create records in bulk. And that's how you create this header. So in this, you're going to select your object, your loading entities, but you could also be relations or interactions. It'd be the same here. Object types, HCP. And where is your data coming from? And it's those batches that this for each is spitting out. So as before, you're going to go to the data pill here, and you're going to select your batch, and that's how you're going to get this here. This is an important step. Otherwise, often what happens if you skip this step, you'll end up loading just one record at a time. Next is your crosswalk. So what type of data are you loading? What's the source system? That's going to go in this type field. And what is the primary key coming from the data you're loading? And that's going to go in this value. Then you do your actual data mapping. So Reltio's full name, in this scenario is mapping to a record or a column called title, first name to first name, last name to last name. So you just work through like you would any other mapping, applying the appropriate field to each step. If you don't have a field, but you need to hard code something, you can simply add double quotes and type out. So maybe I want to set this phone number type to home phone. That's how you would do that. And you can add transforms and logic in here. So if the country code is populated, or the phone number is populated, populate the country code with the country field. But if there is no phone number, we don't want a phone number with only the country field populated, so we're going to skip it. So Reltio Integration Hub has a lot of opportunities to put some clever logic to transform your data in a lot of different ways. It actually uses, I think, the Ruby language here is what this is. So if you're familiar with that, you'll be really quick to pick up the transforms. Moving to the bottom, there's one last important field after you're done mapping, which is your batch size. If this number is not aligned with the batch size here, you're going to be missing records. So make sure whatever you're spitting out in each batch here is the number Reltio is expecting to process. All right, and then I add if there's an error to retry one time, it just loops back through. You can add the error handling by clicking the plus and handle errors. If it fails again, it will come down this branch. So all I'm going to do is take the records that failed to load and write them to a CSV. And then I'm going to write them back to the same folder I wrote before, except instead of the landing, I'm replacing using this Ruby transform, the landing folder to retry, and I'm appending underscore failed. So I can come back and check on these later to see why they failed. I then take the file I loaded and I copy it to a folder called archive. So I have that if I ever need to do a rerun. And then finally, I'm using the S3 app to delete the original file from the landing so it isn't ever reprocessed. So this is a good sample flow of a quick load to HCP, what it might look like, some basic error handling and tracking of history in case you ever need to rerun a load. So I hope this was helpful and I appreciate you listening to my video.